This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guests only. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Welcome to Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces, a podcast devoted to changing the way eating disorders and mental illness are viewed in our society. With your hosts, Jack and Linda Major and Ellen Bennett. Today's guest is Shari Botwin. Shari Botwin, LCSW, has been counseling survivors in recovery from all types of traumas in her Philadelphia-based private practice for over 28 years. Botwin has given expert on-air commentary on breaking stories related to trauma and abuse on many media outlets. You can find Shari Botwin's complete bio in our show notes along with links to her books and website.
Welcome, listeners. We are so glad you are with us today. This podcast is brought to you by our nonprofit organizations, the Emily Connection and KMB for Answers. And now I'd like to welcome my soulmate and best friend, Jack Major, and our dear friend and fellow advocate, Ellen Bennett.
Welcome, listeners. I'm glad to be here again today. And please remember the links for Shari Botwin and your hosts are in the show notes. And please go to those show notes and look up all Shari's wonderful, unbelievable bio.
Welcome, listeners. We are so excited to have Shari return and have an extended conversation with us on a topic that's so important to us.
So my quote for today is from Brené Brown, and it is, "Shame is basically the fear of being unlovable." What do you think of that?
Well, I think we've, in our journeys, we have found so many people with the shame and stigma of whatever the mental illness is, be it eating disorders, be it, trauma of any type. And we need to bring those people out and let them know they're not alone because they are lovable. So,
absolutely. And in Shari's books, this is talked about extensively, that fear, that shame, and being unlovable, and how that is so impactful in a negative way. So, beautiful quote. Beautiful quote.
I never thought about it quite that way before. Okay, so Shari Botwin pays it forward like no other. If you had suffered trauma or abuse, you should read her books. If you are a therapist, you should read her books. If you are fortunate enough not to have experienced trauma or abuse, you should consider reading her books because chances are you know someone who has, and they will help you better understand and respond appropriately and compassionately. Welcome, Shari.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
We're honored.
We are so honored that you took the time out of your extremely busy schedule to be with us today. It's truly an honor to have you on. Again, I think we had you on in the first season. And, it's great to have you back.
Oh, Shari, your books are powerful, and I'm going to follow Linda and say everyone needs to read your books. They are so informative and important and help bring anyone to a better understanding. Thank you and welcome. This is going to be a great conversation.
Well, Shari, it's a beautiful thing to become a LCSW, but it's a whole different thing to write about some of your own experiences and to become a writer and share your work as well. Why was this important to you? And are there some statistics you'd like to share with us in regard to trauma and abuse?
I mean, I think this has been something that I've been wanting to do since I was a child. The idea of writing and sharing and helping people better understand experiences that really don't even make any sense. One of the things I did as I was preparing to come here today was I went and got some of the journals that I wrote very early in my trauma therapy recovery. I got rid of a lot of stuff from my childhood, but I said, do not get rid of these journals because you're going to want them. And it's really sad to look at just how fragmented my memories were and how confused and unaware I was of what was happening to me. But when I look at the journals, I see how I began through therapy to put all of these pieces of the puzzle together. When I would say it was about 10 years ago, that's when I decided I really want to write these books, because I had done so much work in therapy. I was still in therapy, and I've been working with so many survivors who I can relate to in so many ways. Just the confusion, the shame, the anger, the grief. And trauma is one of those things where the word is used very generically. PTSD, it's like sort of like these hashtags, but I think it's important for people to understand what trauma means and what the power is in being able to begin to understand our experiences, speak about our experiences, integrate earlier life experiences. And there are not that many books out there that are written by therapists who are also childhood sexual abuse survivors. So it's sort of like one of those things where I think I've been wanting to write a book probably since I was 10 years old, but I had to be ready to write these books. And the order in which I wrote the books makes sense to me, because when I wrote Thriving After Trauma, I wasn't ready to share anything specific about what happened to me. I could say, yes, I'm a childhood sexual abuse survivor, but I didn't want to talk about who it was. I didn't really want to talk about what happened. And again, I don't focus on that in my writing. I focus more on the impact. But a lot of people ask me when they interviewed me, you say you're an abuse survivor, but you don't say who it was. Can you tell us more about that? And at the time I said, I'm not really ready to share that. I have a lot of shame and guilt. So I think once I felt like, well, no, now I'm ready to start talking about my dad. I'm ready to start talking about my relationship with my mom. It just felt like it made sense to then start to write that next book, which is the one that just came out. It'll be a year on May 7th.
Powerful, very, very powerful. And you're going to talk about the statistics next. And oh my gosh, they're overwhelming, just unbelievable. So it's so important. So why don't you go ahead and share what you think we need to know?
I would say in terms of the statistics, they're probably not accurate, because if we think about how many people actually share stories about things like childhood abuse, I work with people every day who wait until they're 30, 40, 70 years old to talk about it. So when you read things like 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys have experienced some type of sexual violation, I don't necessarily think that that's an accurate representation of the truth. In the book, I wrote about not just sexual abuse, but all types of childhood abuse, and kids who grow up in families where there's narcissistic abuse, which is more verbal abuse. There's no way to prove that happened. So the statistics for that, I can't even really give you a number, because when I look at the numbers, I think, what does that even actually mean? Most kids don't even know what narcissistic abuse is or verbal abuse. So I think the statistics around physical abuse might be a little bit more accurate, because there are cases where we can make a report because there's proof. But I would say, again, 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys are at some point before the age of 18 have had some type of childhood abuse experience.
And you talk about in the book about neglect being, a form of abuse. The kids that are just neglected by their parents. And again, how do you measure that? How many kids are out there that are neglected?
I mean, again, I would say I could think about it in terms of my practice, because the statistics I don't necessarily know are accurate, but especially the clients who have eating disorders, I mean, I would say over 50% of the people I've met, or even talking to colleagues or survivors, are reporting not just that someone actually hurt them, but that when they tried to speak up, or when they told their mom, or when they told a teacher, people didn't listen. They didn't believe them. So that, I would say too, that part of trauma, I think, is the worst part. Not the actual abuse, but the neglect that I felt in my abuse. The realizing as an adult, oh no, my mom knew. And yeah, I did speak up. I might not have been clear and direct, but I definitely spoke up. When kids and teenagers are expressing suicidal thoughts, when kids and teenagers are starving themselves, eating themselves into an oblivion, throwing up, whatever it is, there's something going on. And again, not everybody with an eating disorder has been abused, but people who are struggling with any type of depression, self-destructive tendencies, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. And it's the parents who address that, and they don't ignore it, and they get their kids help. And I know you all know this. I know you know this. It can make a big difference. So I think feeling like I'm growing up in a family where nobody cared about what happened to me, and recognizing as an adult, they did know. They had to know. There were so many signs. I mean, I could sit here and do a 8-hour podcast on just warning signs, and using my own story and some of my clients to say to you, these are not things that were secret, really. So I think that the word neglect, it sounds like, again, it's just a word, but it's from what people tell me. And people have said this to me repeatedly. It's not what happened to me that's the worst part. It's that nobody cared. Nobody listened. Nobody showed me any concern in that. And when I talk with some men and women who struggle with eating disorders, they are able to identify that one of the core reasons, or one of the beliefs that they held through the years that led them to the eating disorder, was feeling like nobody cared about them. And I know, again, that's not true in every story, because I'm sitting with 3 of you that I know that's not what your experience with your kid was like. But I can say when it's related to abuse, that's what people tell me.
Then your courage, your honesty, and bringing this out within your book so that people will begin to understand, so that hopefully more will listen and pay attention, is just so important. One of the things that really kind of piqued my interest was your reflections on flashbacks. Will you share your expertise on flashbacks and repressed memories to help us better understand the long-term effects of trauma? All too often, child abuse is not disclosed until, as we've already talked about, and you were just speaking about not feeling cared about. What an incredibly frightening experience if we particularly think about a child who just feels invisible so take it away, Shari.
Well, the not clinical explanation and reaction to flashbacks is they really suck. They absolutely suck. And I've had some this week, so I'm going to just talk about it. I want to help people understand too, flashbacks happen because there's parts of our experience that we're trying to understand, figure out, digest. When people talk about flashbacks, we say how they just sort of come out of the blue and they feel so out of control. And that's true. But what I've learned is that our brains protect us from things that we can't deal with until we're ready. So when I have flashbacks, I say to myself, you obviously are able to handle this, or you wouldn't have just had that flashback. Flashbacks can be also repetitive. The flashbacks that I had yesterday and one was the other one, Monday or Sunday. I've had them before, but when I had the flashbacks this week, there was another piece to it that I was able to look at. I knew you guys were going to ask me about shame. I knew you were going to ask me about feeling unlovable, unheard. And the flashbacks that I had this week had that theme in it. So I'll give an example because I don't know if this will help people understand. I was doing an interview, and it was a written interview. I didn't do it on the phone, but I was interviewed by US Weekly for a story about child stars and trauma. And I talked about Demi Lovato and how she has been an inspiration because she started talking about having an eating disorder, going into treatment as a late teenager, young adult. We talked in the interview about how she is an example of someone when you face trauma, when you really make sense of what was happening at the time, you can move into a life of full living. So I did the interview. I was excited about the interview. I thought, well, this is really cool. I knew I was starting to have flashbacks because as I was doing the interview, I started, again, these are not new flashbacks, but I started remembering auditioning for movies at around the age of 13, 14. I decided, well, I got to get the heck out of here. I loved to perform, and I wanted parents. I wanted people to love me. So I thought, well, maybe if I can make it in a movie and get on a movie set, I knew I would be able to leave my house for at least 2 or 3 months. So when I was around 14, I was called in. I had a talent manager. I was called in to read to be Roseanne Barr's daughter. I don't know if you guys are going to remember the movie She Devil. It was and I'll tell you what the description of the part was: homely, slightly overweight teenager. So I got called in. I was picked. Isn't that amazing? I was picked. It's terrible. So
oh my goodness. Oh.
I was thinking about when I read the article and I was reading, what she wrote and how she quoted me. I started remembering the audition was in New York. My parents took me up to New York and we stayed in a hotel. And my dad worked in New York a lot. He had clients in New York. And this part, I don't fully remember how this all unfolded, but I was really sick. I had the flu. Now, in 1984, they didn't do auditions on Zoom. You can't reschedule. So I say to my agent, I'm really sick. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. And she says, if you don't do this, then you're going to get cut. You have to go. And so then I was remembering this week how my parents put me in a cab, sent me by myself, knew I had the flu, allowed me to go to the audition. And I remembered sitting in the cab, and I just had the flu a couple weeks ago. So I think this is why I had the flashback too. But I was so sick. I remember sitting in the cab, just wanting to when you're really sick with the flu, you just kind of want to fall over and feeling like I'm going to mess this up. I'm not going to be able to do this audition. Then I can't leave my house. But also thinking, why am I sitting in this cab by myself? I was a teenager. I'm not really sure if that's a good idea. I work with plaintiffs who've been sexually assaulted by Uber drivers. Those are some of the cases that I've worked on. I've done 2 now. And so I was thinking about that. I was thinking about how sad it is that I felt like I had to be a movie star. It's not funny, but I laugh about everything. I'm like, so you decided you were going to be a movie star to get out of your parents' house? Pretty creative. But this week, I was just, the day after the article came out, I just got hit with these flashbacks and I was so sad. I was just I can't believe I would never, my kid's turning 14 in a month. I would never let him go in a cab to New York City when he had the flu. Even though my parents were in New York, that part I don't remember if they were still there, if they were back in New Jersey, but that doesn't make any sense. You don't, I don't even know if you can go to auditions without a parent anymore. I'm not even sure about that. And it just made me so sad because I remember sitting in the cab just feeling so alone, so stranded, so desperate. And I was so sick. I had the flu a few weeks ago and I wanted a mom, and I'm 54 years old. So, when you're really sick, you just want somebody to like give you a hug. Yeah. At one point, my kid came in the room and he just looked at me and he was like, Mom. And I'm like, can you get me like another blanket? Because I was cold. I was, having the chills. And he just sort of smiled at me and he was like, you already have blankets. And I'm like, I need another one. I'm freezing. I said, dude, I am so sick. And he kind of laughed and he was like, oh gosh, dude, what did he say? Dude, you're like wrecked. And I'm like, pretty much. But even that, like it felt good to have that extra blanket and have that moment with my kid. And I knew when I was sick, I wasn't abandoning him. I wasn't neglecting him. I mean, I was doing the best that I could under the circumstances, but all these different things. And what I want people to understand is when you have flashbacks, you have what I call them feeling flashbacks. We don't just see a picture. I didn't just have an image of me in the cab. I actually could feel what I was feeling at that age. I could remember feeling like the physical feeling of sickness. I could remember feeling pain and shame and like nobody cares about me. And I'm basically screwed because there's no way I'm going to get this part because I'm going to suck. And I did. I don't even think I knew the lines because I was so sick. So when you have flashbacks, you remember feelings, smells. I remember being in the cab and there's all this traffic and thinking, what if the guy takes me where he's not supposed to take me? I don't know how to get around New York City. So when this is the thing, when I'm having flashbacks and I tell people this, you have to just be real. How do I say? You got to just go with caution, because oftentimes what you do and what I did when I had flashbacks earlier in my life was when my eating disorder got loud because I didn't want to feel. So I would start to obsess about food, not eat, overeat. So what I say to people is, listen, you can do that, but that's not going to make the flashback go away. It's just going to delay the moving through it. Now at 54, I know how to do it, and I'm not going to sit here and say I don't have thoughts of using my eating disorder. The other day I was thinking, I'm just not going to eat anything today. And then I said to myself, well, that's stupid, but why are you going to do that? And I said to myself, you don't want to feel this, right? And of course I don't want to feel it. So I didn't eat until I made space to eat, if that makes sense. I just said, you have to just move through this and you have to try to make sense of it. And that's what I ended up, doing. But I was really sad. At one point I texted somebody and I was just like, I didn't say I had a flashback. I just said, today actually is really not a good day. It sucks, It just was a lousy day. I think it was Sunday because I didn't work. When I work and I'm having flashbacks, it's a little easier because I can shift. But Sunday was one of those days where we didn't have anything until 6:00. It's freezing cold. So some of the things I would normally do, like sit in the sun, go for a drive, go for a walk. It's too cold. I'm not going for a walk.
Yeah.
I'm not going for a walk,
Oh, but you know yourself, right? Yeah. I mean, and that's just great. We're all vulnerable, but you know what works and you know how to put it in place probably much better than most.
So, Shari, I mean, you spend so much of your time counseling people that, have had trauma and abuse, and I'm sure sometimes it just feels overwhelming, and just wonder, how do you ground yourself? How do you, step back and,
I have these shoes on right now, these sort of Uggs. They're, as my kid would say, those are knockoffs, Mom. They're not the real version, but they're really warm. What I do when I sit here is I keep my feet on the ground, and my therapist used to say to me, just wiggle your toes in your shoes. And I used to say to her, that is the dumbest thing I ever heard, but it actually really helps. I have my back against the chair right now. I have this warm, thing that helps my back, and it's the heat's on so I can feel the heat. How do I ground myself? I work out. Like this morning before we came on and did this, I rode the Peloton and had a blast, did a really fun class. I think about the things in my life that make me happy. I think about the things that I'm looking forward to. Grounding techniques are what I think is when we try to stay in a place of, and I feel like all of you probably know what this means. When the pain gets overwhelming, you just try to think about the things that make you feel happy or the things that make you feel grateful. Like this week, I feel grateful for my sanity. I feel grateful for, I love my life. I love having this kid. He is just, my kid grounds me. Just listening to him on the phone last night, I heard him say something like, "You suck at this game." They were playing some type of game, and then I could hear the kid on the other end cracking up, and that grounds me because I'm listening to normalcy. I watch shows sometimes that make me laugh. I have to admit, there are times when I struggle with grounding myself because I find that I don't want to feel alone. And I think all of you can relate. And I bet so many people with eating disorders can relate. Sometimes I want to watch shows that are about trauma because it makes me feel less alone. So like last night I was watching Will Trent and thinking, why are you watching this? This is like actually really triggering. And then I was like, well, I really like it because the one character, I know she's a childhood abuse survivor and she's badass and I love watching her. So I'm going to keep watching it. But I got support in it too, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Shari, do you still journal?
Nuts. I don't journal. What I do now is I talk.
Okay.
I talk a lot. Instead of journaling, I talk to others. So after I was having those flashbacks in New York, I wrote to my friend Jane. I just said to her what was happening and how PTSD can really suck. So I probably would say it wouldn't be a bad idea for me to journal. It probably would be helpful. But I think at this point, I just don't want to be alone in my thoughts. I would rather share them.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yeah.
Because it helps me not feel as much shame.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like in your book how you share about your own therapist, and her name is Dorothy, and that's my mother's name too. So it's a very special name.
Oh.
And I like how you're very open about how you gave her a hard time sometimes, and I think that's very normal too. And I think it's just a process, and as you heal and grow. So when somebody has experienced a past trauma, I imagine that it's extremely hard for them to trust people again, and sometimes difficult for them after they have found their voice not to overreact when someone has an opinion that's different from theirs. So when someone is triggered by something that seems to be trivial, is there an appropriate and compassionate way to respond to the person who has experienced the trauma? Because sometimes I think it just, we're astounded sometimes and can't figure out, why somebody reacts the way they do. So can you just briefly give us a few tips on that? Because I think we all want to do better.
That's a great question. When someone is overreacting, or when you're in a situation and you're thinking, what in the heck is going on? My reaction is so strong right now. Why am I feeling like this person is trying to shatter me or undo me? The first thing that we want to ask ourselves, or your loved one, is, where is that coming from? Like, is what I'm saying right now, are you hearing me, or are you also like, and again, this is more therapy talk, but have you felt that way before? Where is that coming from? The problem I used to have with that, when Dorothy would say to me, when I would get all mad at her and tell her she sucks and she doesn't care about me and la, 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 she would say, where's that coming from? And I'd say, can't I just say how I feel, and can't you just leave me alone? But now I understand that, like, I was reacting to her as if she were my mom or my dad or somebody that had caused me harm. And that's what we do when we're triggered, especially when we have trust issues. We think pretty quickly, that person doesn't care about me, that person doesn't love me, that person doesn't have my back. So one of the things I would say to someone is, if you feel like you're reacting stronger than what you want, give yourself a minute, take a step back, tell the person, you know what, I need a minute. If you're the loved one and you know that you're being attacked, or you feel like your loved one is lashing out onto you, and you know that that person is a trauma survivor, you can say to that person, why don't we just take a minute? Like, let's just take a minute here and give ourselves a minute to really think about what is happening. Usually once people start therapy and working through trauma, they can recognize when they're starting to overreact, and we develop the tools and the mechanisms. But there are so many people, obviously, who don't even know that they have trauma in their history. They don't know they're overreacting. They don't understand projection. So I think it's important that we educate ourselves. And again, that's another reason why I like to talk and be out there, because I want people to understand overreacting is a normal response to trauma. It's just something that you have to understand will happen and accept it. Not like beat yourself up about it or think, I'm not good at relationships, I'm not going to be able to have partners or friends. No, you will. You just have to understand you're going to overreact. But if you know what to do or how to manage it, and you know when it's happening, you can work through it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautifully put.
So beautiful. Oh, while I was listening to your book on Audible, I was struck by how difficult it can be to identify when someone is experiencing any level of trauma. As a former educator, I was a mandated reporter and saw firsthand the impact on individuals and families. I was frustrated when it was so difficult to help because of denial and a culture of secrets, which delayed intervention. How can we begin to break down these barriers and move the reality of trauma out of the shadows and secrecy? Your books are incredible resources. And again, I'm encouraging everybody to listen or read. They are extremely informative and must read. So, what can we do better?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, as humans, we never want to think that people could do such acts of harm unto others.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that I used to sit in therapy over and over and say, how can a mom do that? Not how could my mom do that? Because I didn't want to know it. So how can somebody treat another person, whether it's your child, your husband, your student? I think we as humans can't wrap our heads around how people can be so malicious and so sick. In order for us to take it more seriously, we have to accept that it happens. And like we know with the statistics, it happens all the time. And we also have to educate the public about what is the makeup of a predator. They're not the kind of the predators that, commit crimes against strangers. The Uber driver who assaults the person in the car, that's a stranger, right? More often than not, cases of abuse are done by people that we love and trust. So to be able to understand that people that we love and trust can also be sick. My dad was not an evil person. He had friends. He had a good job. I mean, he was well respected in the community. When I went to his funeral, there must have been 300 people there. And I remember sitting in the funeral thinking, this doesn't make any sense. And then I would question myself, well, maybe he didn't do it. Like that went on forever. But I think if we understand that predators have many parts to them, they can be very loving, very kind, very smart, but they can also be really messed up and really sick. So we have to begin to really understand the makeup of a predator. And here's where I get frustrated. In the legal system, judges and lawyers are not educated about that. And they're the ones that are, for people who want to go through the legal system, we have to go through them and trust them. So there's a lack of understanding. There's a lack of understanding in the education system, in the sense that teachers, I think, because I've worked with teachers, they're put in situations where they're doing what they're supposed to do, like you're saying, Ellen, and nobody listens. I went through that with a client last year. She spent months trying to report multiple incidents of abuse, and the kid still lives with the parent. That would be what we would talk about in therapy, which was enraging because I'm her therapist and she's having to tell me what amount of trauma it was for her as a teacher to not be able to get the kid the help that he needed.
Yeah.
And she did what she was supposed to do. She did everything she was supposed to do. So I think if we can be more open, we can talk about it more. There are so many advocates out here, just like you guys are, advocates in the sense that these are people who've been abused and have decided that they want to take their abuse and make it their life purpose. They're not all therapists. Some of them are just advocates trying to change laws, trying to educate people in the legal system. We need to keep talking about it, and we need to be open and honest about what is a predator, what is abuse, and what can we do when someone is reporting or showing warning signs. How do we listen to them?
Yeah. There's, and with the social media, the internet, there's so many people that meet people, on the internet. And I'm sure you saw the case that just happened here near Rochester last week, where the person from Minnesota moved here because he met this woman on the internet, and he was sexually abused horrifically by 5 people, right?
And he was killed.
And he was killed. Murdered. It made national news, and it's just, you talk about wondering how somebody could do that to another human being. It's just, it's inconceivable to me. It's, to
I know.
think that could be done to another person. So, there was, a lot of. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say this because I don't know if this will help people, but learning or coming to terms with that people can do these things and actually making sense of it is part of what is healing. To be able to look at the pathology, and in my situation, it would be my dad. I do understand now why he did what he did to me. I actually understand it. And I know that might sound like you're going to give him a pass, you're going to let him off the hook. No, I understand it, so that actually helps me to live with it.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to skip along to my next question.
My next question we've answered already. Yeah.
Shari, your message is very hopeful, as is your lived experience. You are a survivor and living proof that healing is possible and that therapy is essential. Are most individuals willing to do the work it takes to begin healing? And are there peer support groups for people who have been traumatized or abused?
Most people will, in my experience, delay the healing process until they're at a point in their life where they can begin to confront it. Usually what I notice is that people need to be of a certain age. You know how they say at 26, our brain is fully developed? What I notice a lot with people is they begin to start confronting their past when they're around 26, 27. And again, now I've met people who are 50 that just started talking. But I think it's a good question. Are people willing? I think we, as trauma survivors, are very good at avoiding. We are actually masters, just like I say with eating disorders. We are so good at avoiding, but eventually I think what happens is when we realize this is actually making my life awful and it's making me not want to live anymore, or it's making me not want to be healthy or be with other people. When you get to that point where you're like, I've had enough of this, I need to do something, people begin to step forward and speak and heal. I would say that because we talk more now about PTSD and trauma, I think more people are getting help now. And again, I don't have the statistics, so I can't sit here and say this many people go to therapy. But for example, people in their teens and 20s, they just tell each other, yeah, I have therapy now. Or yeah, I'm on Prozac because I was diagnosed with PTSD. There has been a movement in the right direction in terms of ownership and facing trauma. when you ask about peer support groups, there are so many. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to send you links, because there are so many. If you Google PTSD online support groups, there are national networks. Just like for eating disorder, we have eating disorders. We have like the National Eating Disorder Association, and they list supports. Same with trauma and PTSD. There are so many resources that if you want to get help, you will find it. It's out there. You have to be careful. You don't want to just call anybody. You want to make sure that the group is being run by a reputable and knowledgeable trauma organization. You want to like vet the groups out a bit. Who runs them? How are they held? Are they confidential? But there is more support out there. When I was in therapy in my early 30s, there was no group to go to. There was no internet. I have to be honest, I probably wouldn't have gone anyway. But
you weren't
I
ready.
think about that. I would be like, I don't want to sit with those people. But now there are so many resources. And I think that that is amazing. And different types of trauma. If you're a childhood abuse survivor, don't go to a group with people who went to war, because that's not the same. PTSD is not the same. If you are someone who's been sexually assaulted as an adult, go to a group with other adults who've been assaulted as adults. Don't sit with childhood abuse survivors, because there's going to be a disconnect there. It's not going to necessarily give you all of what you need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Makes perfect sense.
Shari, childhood abuse can have lifelong impacts, as you know all too well with all your own experience and the people you work with. Will you take us deeper into your understanding of the impact of family dynamics to help us all understand the depths of how destructive abuse and trauma can be?
The family dynamics are generational. There are many, many secrets in families where there's abuse. And a lot of times, as survivors, we start to begin to figure out where this started. Did this start with my parents? Did this start with their parents? There's a generational piece, and there's a pathology that families who come from, or people who come from families where there's this type of trauma, there's a lot of unspoken experiences that never get dealt with. There's a lot of taking things and throwing it under the rug. A lot of silence, a lot of shame, a lot of misplacement of feelings, all kinds of, all kinds of dysfunction that in order to break the cycle, the part of healing is being able to understand the background of your family, the pathology of your family. And therapy can help with that too, because therapists can help us identify what actually the pathology is based on what we tell them. So I think that there's just so many secrets that haven't been dealt with, and that trauma just keeps repeating itself over and over, just keeps happening until somebody says, I'm going to say something, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to speak up. And I think that's one of the things I love about my job is I get to witness that every day. I get to witness people making that choice to no longer continue the cycle and to change the dynamics in the family and begin to heal so that the family that they're in now doesn't have to be the same as the one they come from.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You really are opening up a conversation that everybody needs to really think about and understand. Thank you.
So, Shari, as I'm sitting here looking at your bio, and I encourage everybody to go to the show notes and read the whole bio on Shari, because it's so unbelievably impressive. When you became an expert witness on so many high-profile cases and a guest on so many respected news shows and magazines and everything, what has that experience been like for you? How were you first called? I know you were on the R. Kelly case, which had to be, unbelievable.
It was scary.
Yeah, was it? So yeah, how do you deal with all that? I mean, and when did it first start for you?
I got called 3 years ago. It was this time 3 years ago. One of the former attorneys who prosecuted Bill Cosby. We met at the trial because I went to that trial to be an advocate. And she called me about the R. Kelly case. And she said, we need an expert to testify on behalf of these plaintiffs. And I just started laughing. Why are you calling me? I'm a licensed clinical social worker. She says, no, I need someone to come to court and be what we call a damages expert, which in civil court means to explain to the jury and the judge the impact that this situation had on these particular plaintiffs. So I thought, well, I guess I can do that. So I met with each of the plaintiffs and I sat in court with each of the plaintiffs talking with the judge about the impact of the experience that they had in this particular case, which was when the plaintiffs were getting ready to have the opening for their documentary, Surviving R. Kelly. I'm not sure if any of you heard of that, but a year or so, right? So the trauma was that R. Kelly and his talent manager threatened to blow up the theater if they went through with it. So when they got to the theater and were about to start showing the documentary, there was the threat of an explosion. So my job was to talk about the impact that had, the fear of their life being ended because they're speaking. So what I found was once I started testifying, it was very scary at first, but then I thought, I'm just sitting in court doing the same thing I do at work. I'm just doing it in a different way. Instead of doing therapy with plaintiffs, I'm now educating the judge about the impact of the trauma. And what I do in court is I give recommendations for healing, for treatment. So I basically am just explaining to the jury and the judge what happened, the impact, and what I think they need moving forward so that they can get their lives back. So I would say that was my first case, and it was scary. And then I've done several other cases. The biggest case that I did was involving over 100 women who were abused by a Long Island pediatrician. His practice was open from 1969 to 2001. So I met with plaintiffs over the course of months and went to court 30-something times. They all were abused by their pediatrician as children, and half of them had eating disorders. One of them at one point was down to 43 pounds, hospitalized 18 times, I think she said. So I find that experience it's very empowering because it helps me to be able to explain to someone in the legal system what the impact of abuse. Because in therapy, I talk about it with my therapist. Today, I'm talking about it with you, which is great. But to be able to help people who aren't necessarily trained and educated, and also for the plaintiffs, I don't notice this when I'm testifying, but what I found out after was that there was a woman, my first case with the pediatrician, we were on Zoom and she was sitting in the room on Zoom when I was testifying, but I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at the judge, and she was DID. She had dissociative identity disorder, anorexia, PTSD, depression. The lawyer told me after that as I began to talk about the impact of the abuse, she said it was almost like the plaintiff had an awakening as she was sitting in the hearing with you. And for me, that's like, oh, so she felt heard. It's so meaningful, like to be able to give that in a way that I do that in therapy, but I know what that feels like. And I also know what it feels like to not be heard. So it's like sort of like transformative in a way. I'm able to do for others what I didn't get because this particular plaintiff, her mom didn't believe her. She's 43 now. So the abuse happened when she was a little, like age 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. One of the things we talked about in the case was the impact of trying to speak up and her mom didn't believe her. So for her, I think one of her younger parts must have been in the room that day. And I think she got a feeling of like, finally somebody listened. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Wow.
Right. God bless you for all you're doing for so many people and making such a difference.
So where can our listeners find you? And is there anything that we should have asked you and didn't?
We could go on for at least another hour, I'm sure, or more.
Briefly.
I mean, no, the only thing I'm thinking, because I know some about all of you, is that what you're all doing is it doesn't feel much different than what I'm doing. You've all experienced something so sad and traumatic and horrific. And what I know about the three of you is you're taking that and you're using that experience in a way that you're helping so many people. So if we were going to do like another show, I'd want to talk to you guys and interview the three of you. But I'm not allowed to do that because it's not my pod. But I would say the power of taking horrific experiences and turning it into something hopeful is ultimately the best revenge. It's justice, and it's also peace of mind in a situation where you feel like your heart's been broken.
Yeah. And I look at, the high profile cases that are always on television, on so many of the things, nightly news and Good Morning America, things that you've been on, and everybody is shocked when something happens to a high profile, person that's in the media or an actor or whatever. And I say, all the people that are still out there invisible, all the, people that aren't talked about, nobody knows about. Those are the people that, really, we're trying to reach in the eating disorder community, and what you're doing, in the eating disorder and all traumas is to give a face and a voice to those people, because they matter just as much.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, you want to just quickly tell people where they can find you?
Where can you find me? You can go to my website.
Okay.
It's just my name, www.sharibotwin.com. Everything's there. The big, the links to the books, the articles, it's all right there.
And everything for today is in the show notes. This time has gone by so quickly. Thank you so much, Shari, for being our very special guest and for educating us and for doing what you do and helping so many people. We extend our sincere gratitude to you, our listeners, and to Shari for joining us today. We'd also like to thank Rockbox Recording and Production and Scott Fitzgerald, our remarkable sound engineer, for his exceptional production of our podcast and so much more.
Shari, thank you for giving voice to those who have been silenced for so long. And we certainly understand that deep level of feeling alone and facing the unbelievable. Thank you. Okay, everybody, tell your family and friends about Once Shattered, Picking Up the Pieces. Please rate, review, share, and subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening to us on. And check out our YouTube channel. Learn more about Shari Botwin and her books, Stolen Childhoods and Thriving After Trauma, Stories of Living and Healing. Read these books. Linda and Jack Mazur founded the Emily Connection and wrote Emily, the story of a girl and her family hijacked by anorexia, available on Amazon.
And all listeners, please learn more about the wonderful, colorful co-host here, Ellen Bennett, and her nonprofit that she started in memory of her daughter, Katie, KMB for Answers. All these discussions are so incredibly important, as they emphasize and can't emphasize enough the importance of the mental health for all of us. And remember, if you need a place to record your podcast, your audiobook, or create a great legacy cast for your loved ones, Rockbox Recording and Production is our only recommendation. Thank you all for listening.